He thought she was just another black woman he could intimidate, until she walked into court and destroyed his career. The road was nearly empty that night. A few cars rolled past, their headlights bouncing off wet pavement. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows over the stretch of highway outside Birmingham, Alabama. It was just past 11, the kind of hour where most people only wanted to get home. Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson had been driving for nearly 2 hours, her fingers drumming lightly against the wheel as she hummed along to the soft rhythm of an old jazz tune. She wasn't in uniform, just a simple black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back. Nothing about her stood out, or so she thought. Then came the lights in her rearview mirror, red and blue flashing, gaining on her fast. Her stomach clenched, not out of fear but exhaustion. She knew how these things went. Signaling carefully, she changed lanes and eased onto the shoulder. She put the car in park, took a slow breath, and kept both hands visible. Years in the military had taught her the drill. A white patrol car rolled to a stop behind her. The officer took his time getting out, moving like a man who expected obedience. Heavy boots scuffed against asphalt, one hand resting on his belt while the other swept a flashlight beam toward her car. Through the side mirror, she caught his name. Briggs, license and registration. No greeting, no explanation. His voice was flat, practiced, impatient. Renee met his eyes in the mirror, then slowly reached into the glove compartment and handed over her documents. "Was I speeding, officer?" she asked evenly. Briggs didn't answer at first. He took the papers and held them just out of reach while circling her car with his light. "Tail lights out," he said finally. "That can't be right." He looked at her sharply. "Are you arguing with me?" The air shifted, heavy with that quiet, unspoken moment where power met resistance and one side expected the other to cave. Renee had seen it before on bases overseas, in training exercises meant to prepare sailors for the world outside the Navy. She knew better than to provoke, but she also knew her rights. "I'm just saying," she replied calmly. "My taillights were checked a few weeks ago, but if there's an issue, I can get it fixed." "Step out of the car." Renee exhaled slowly, glancing at the passing traffic. No witnesses. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel once, then reached for the door handle. "Mind telling me why?" Briggs tilted his head, smirking. "Because I said so." She let that hang in the air before unbuckling her seatbelt and stepping out. The night air was cooler than expected. Her posture relaxed but measured. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wouldn't be bullied either. "Turn around." Hands on the car, she hesitated. "For what reason?" Briggs stepped closer, his smirk fading. "Are you resisting?" "No, I'm asking a question." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, amusement, maybe both. Then he grabbed his radio. "We got a non-compliant driver here," he muttered before raising his voice again. "Turn around." Her pulse quickened, but her expression stayed neutral. "Officer, I need you to understand something," she said firmly. "I know exactly what I'm allowed to do, and I know exactly what you can't do." His jaw tightened. "You're under arrest." He reached for her wrist. Renee stepped back just enough to avoid his grip. "Under arrest for what?" Briggs snapped out his cuffs. "For obstructing an officer." She exhaled sharply through her nose. So that was his game. Her military training steadied her breathing, her heartbeat. Two choices: comply and fight later, or push back and risk escalation. She wasn't about to become another statistic. With slow, deliberate movements, she turned and placed her hands on the roof of her car. The metal was cool beneath her palms. Briggs yanked her arms behind her back, tightening the cuffs too far before shoving her toward his patrol car. "You don't know what you're doing," she murmured. He chuckled. "Lady, I know exactly what I'm doing." But he didn't. Not even close. The hard plastic seat dug into her back as she sat cuffed in silence, wrists burning. Her breath came steady, controlled. Outside, Briggs strutted back to his vehicle, muttering into his radio. Renee stared at her faint reflection in the partition glass. Calm, composed, but with something simmering beneath the surface. She had been through combat drills. She knew how to survive this. And she knew this wasn't the end. She had faced high-stakes operations and interrogations in foreign territories. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was a man with a badge, drunk on power, convinced he was untouchable. Minutes crawled by. 5, then 10. She shifted her hand slightly, testing the cuffs. Too tight. He'd done it on purpose. The driver's side door swung open and Briggs slid in, whistling to himself. Well, he muttered, pulling his seatbelt across his chest. Let's take a little ride. She didn't respond. He threw the car into gear, the patrol car lurching forward as the red and blue lights still flashed. Reflection stained the road behind them like a warning. You know, Briggs said after a moment. Most people just keep their mouths shut when I tell them to step out. Renee exhaled sharply through her nose. And most officers don't arrest people for questioning a traffic stop. Briggs laughed, shaking his head. Lady, you must really think you're somebody. She met his eyes in the glass partition. I don't think. I know, that made him pause. His knuckles flexed around the wheel, irritation flickering through his smug mask before he covered it up. You military? He asked suddenly, his tone shifting. She stayed silent. Yeah, I figured, he continued. Got that attitude, that above-the-law type. Bet you thought I'd back off if you threw that around, huh? He smirked. Still, she said nothing. Briggs clicked his tongue. Shame. If you'd just kept your mouth shut, we could have avoided all this. Her jaw tightened. The audacity of it, his actions framed as her fault. The station came into view, a squat gray brick building just off the main road. The parking lot was nearly empty, late-night processing running slow. It looked like she'd be the only guest. Briggs pulled into a reserved spot, killed the engine, and glanced back at her through the partition. Gotta say, he murmured, I do love when they make it easy. Before she could reply, he was out of the car, slamming the door. A second later, her door opened. Let's go. Renee twisted her wrist slightly as she stepped out. The cuffs bit deeper into her skin. She kept her head high as he led her inside, past a bored desk sergeant and into processing. The holding area smelled of old coffee and sweat. A metal bench lined the far wall, a steel door leading to the cells beyond. Briggs uncuffed her just long enough for booking, fingerprints, mugshot, the whole routine. The other officers barely looked up, going through motions with indifference. It was the kind of apathy that let men like Briggs thrive. When it was over, he gripped her wrist again, dragging her toward the cells. Think you're smart, huh? He muttered. I don't have to think, she shot back. His grip tightened, irritation flashing in his eyes. Enjoy your stay, he sneered, shoving her toward the cell. Renee caught herself before stumbling. She turned just as the bars slid shut between them. Briggs smirked, tapping the metal lightly with his fingers before walking away. The lock clicked into place. She drew a slow breath and sank onto the bench. The chill of the metal pressed through her jeans, grounding her. One night, that's all it would take. Because Briggs had no idea who he had just messed with. The bench was cold, hard, unforgiving. Renee shifted, rolling her shoulders against the stiffness creeping in. The cell was bare. 4 walls, a flickering light, the sour scent of sweat and disinfectant. She had spent nights in far worse conditions, in places where the threat wasn't discomfort, but real danger. This was nothing. But that didn't mean she wasn't angry. Through the bars, faint voices carried, officers at the front desk, the shuffle of papers, the clatter of a coffee cup. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Control the breathing, control the mind. Lessons drilled into her long before she joined the fleet. Then came the heavy footsteps. Briggs. She knew it was him before he even came into view. His stride carried that same arrogant rhythm, like a man who believed he was untouchable. A moment later, Briggs appeared in front of the cell, arms crossed, that familiar smirk plastered across his face. Comfy? He asked. She didn't answer. He tilted his head, stepping closer to the bars. You know, if you'd just played along, you wouldn't be in here right now. Renee let a slow smile curl at the corners of her lips. Oh, I'm exactly where I need to be. Briggs's smirk faltered just for a second. A flicker of annoyance, maybe even uncertainty, crossed his eyes. But he masked it quickly, scoffing as he glanced toward the empty holding area. No one's coming to get you tonight, lady, he muttered with a shrug. Guess that means you'll have some time to think about that attitude. Renee simply watched him, unmoved, unshaken. Briggs leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. See, here's the thing. People like you think the rules don't apply. You think a little confidence is enough to get out of trouble. She let him talk, let him ramble. None of it mattered. Because he had no idea what was coming. And then, as if on cue, another officer approached from the hallway. He was younger, probably in his late 20s, a clipboard tucked under his arm. Sergeant, the officer said, voice carrying just a trace of unease. We got a call. Briggs barely spared him a glance. The officer shifted awkwardly, then pressed on. I think you need to see this. Briggs frowned, then cast one last look at Renee before stepping away. She leaned back, listening closely. The conversation was hushed, but she caught fragments. Something about a lawyer, a call from higher up, questions about why she was being held. Briggs's voice dropped, sharp and irritated. The younger officer stammered a reply, but whatever it was, it didn't sit well. Heavy footsteps returned. Briggs stormed back, jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. His smirk was gone. What the hell did you do? He snapped. Renee leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. I didn't do anything. She tilted her head slightly. But people talk, and some of us have friends in very high places. His face darkened. She could see it now, the realization sinking in, the shift in power. He wasn't in control anymore. Briggs turned on his heel, muttering under his breath as he disappeared down the hallway. Renee exhaled. It wouldn't be long now, and when the truth came out, Briggs would regret every single decision that had led him here. Morning light spilled through the narrow windows of the courthouse, casting long streaks across the polished floor. The air inside was crisp, the kind of cold that settled deep into your bones if you sat still too long. Renee stood near the defendant's table, posture relaxed but eyes sharp. No handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit. Instead, a well-tailored navy blazer, a simple blouse, and an undeniable presence. She wasn't alone. At her side, her attorney, Carla Whitman, flipped through a stack of papers, barely looking up as people filtered into the courtroom. Carla was efficient, methodical. No wasted movements, no small talk. Renee liked that. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Briggs entered. He still carried himself as if he owned the room, shoulders squared, chin lifted, but there was something different now. A stiffness in his stride, a flicker of doubt in his expression. He wasn't as sure of himself anymore. Renee caught his eye. He looked away. Good. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Judge Alan Kirkland, an older man with a weary expression, adjusted his glasses as he settled into his seat. All right, he sighed, glancing at the case files. Let's get to it. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with neatly combed hair, rose from his chair. Your Honor, we have reason to believe the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Renee Dawson, was unlawfully detained without probable cause. Furthermore, new information suggests a pattern of misconduct involving the arresting officer, Sergeant Daniel Briggs. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Briggs shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Judge Kirkland peered over his glasses. Sergeant Briggs, he said evenly, care to explain? Briggs leaned forward, clearing his throat. Your Honor, the defendant was uncooperative. During a routine traffic stop, the prosecutor cut Briggs off before he could finish. Uncooperative? He challenged, lifting a document from the table. Lieutenant Commander Dawson's record shows a distinguished military career. Graduate of the Naval Academy. Multiple commendations. No criminal history. No outstanding citations. Are you telling me that despite all this, she was such a threat that you had to arrest her over a broken taillight? Briggs opened his mouth, then shut it. The silence stretched. The prosecutor continued, flipping through his papers. Additionally, an internal review of your arrest history shows a disproportionate number of traffic stops involving black drivers in this district. Murmurs grew louder. Briggs's face darkened. Judge Kirkland set his file down with a sigh. Sergeant, I don't like what I'm hearing. Briggs sat back, arms crossed. She resisted, he muttered. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow. The body cam footage says otherwise. Another ripple of noise moved through the room. Briggs looked at the judge, suddenly defensive. I was following standard procedure. Judge Kirkland wasn't buying it. He glanced toward the bailiff. Let's play the footage. A screen lowered at the front of the courtroom. The video began to play. Renee didn't turn to watch, she had lived it. Briggs barking orders, her calm voice, the unnecessary escalation, the smug way he tightened the cuffs. The room was dead silent when the footage ended. Judge Kirkland leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Sergeant Briggs, you violated protocol. You conducted an unlawful arrest and you failed to report the full details in your initial statement. Briggs opened his mouth, but the judge wasn't finished. The charges against Lieutenant Commander Dawson are hereby dismissed. His gavel came down, sharp and final. And I strongly suggest an internal investigation into Sergeant Briggs's conduct. The tension in the room snapped like a pulled rubber band. Briggs looked like he had been punched in the gut. face flushed red, hands clenched into fists at his sides. Renee exhaled slowly, controlled. She never had a doubt. As she stood collecting her things, she glanced toward Briggs one last time. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged, they didn't need to be. This time she wasn't the one fighting for her reputation. Briggs was. Briggs stormed out of the courtroom, his heavy footsteps echoing down the polished hallways. His jaw was tight, his face drawn, every muscle stiff with rage. He could feel the eyes on him. Other officers, court staff, even reporters who had shown up once word of the case spread. He wasn't used to this. He was used to control, to walking into a room and commanding respect or fear. Now the power he had taken for granted felt like it was slipping through his fingers. And then came the worst part. Sergeant Briggs. The sharp voice cut through the hallway noise. He turned. Chief Eldon Baker stood with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. The older man had been on the force for over 30 years. A respected figure, his word carried weight. Briggs straightened. "Sir?" he muttered. Baker studied him for a long moment, then with a curt nod motioned for Briggs to follow him into a private office. The second the door shut, the chief's tone dropped. "What the hell were you thinking?" Briggs exhaled sharply. "I was doing my job." "Your job?" Baker scoffed, tossing a file onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. "That's not what it looks like from here." The body cam footage, the arrest history, the fact that you didn't even know who you were arresting. Briggs's nostrils flared. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," Baker shot back, voice sharp. This wasn't some random woman. This was a high-ranking Navy officer. "You think this is just going to disappear?" Briggs looked away, grinding his teeth. "She was disrespectful. She questioned you," Baker cut in coldly. "That's not a crime." Briggs shook his head. "You don't get it. People like that." The chief's expression hardened. "People like what?" Silence. Briggs swallowed but said nothing. Baker sighed, rubbing his forehead. "The DA is reviewing every single one of your cases from the past 5 years. You've been flagged for racial profiling, and you'd better believe this department isn't going down with you." Briggs felt his stomach twist. "What does that mean?" Baker straightened, his face grim.